Hello everyone, I am Siddharthan. In this video, we will be discussing how we can deploy a machine learning model as an API in Python. And for creating this API, we will be using the Python library called FastAPI. In our previous video, we have seen how we can deploy machine learning models using Streamlit, right? But the disadvantage of using libraries like Streamlit or Flask is that they are more of a prototyping tool. So we won't be getting that much detailed UI and it is not like that much flexible as well. So the most widely used method is to deploy this machine learning model in the form of API and then integrating this API with our UI system. Okay, so let's say we are creating our user interface using tools like React JS. And once we create that UI, we will integrate this API to this. Okay, so when we say API, we finally get a URL and we will post this URL to that UI system. And now this will be a working system where your front end, which is your UI, will be connected to your backend, which is basically the API we are creating in Python. Okay, and I hope you know that the full form of this API is application programming interface. Okay, and the first step for this is to save the model that we have trained. So I'll open my Google Collaboratory. So for this, we will be using the same diabetes prediction model that we have already worked on. So I have already posted a video on how we can build this diabetes prediction machine learning model, and I'll give the link for that video in this video description. If you want, you can check that out. Okay. So in order to save this model, just I'll give the link for this collab notebook as well. So connect your system. So once it's connected, we have to upload this dataset file, which is diabetes.csv. So I've did all these coding parts, so I'm not explaining what we are doing in these steps. So if you want a detailed explanation of all these steps, please watch this diabetes prediction video. And now I'll go to my files and I'll upload this dataset file. So this dataset file is in my desktop, which is diabetes.csv. Okay. So these are the basic step of importing the libraries and importing the data set into this data frame and so on. So after that, we are training this machine learning model using support vector classifier model, SVC, and after that we are like predicting what is its accuracy score. So the accuracy score is like 78 percentage and 77 percentage. So this is for training data and test data, and this is the code for predictive system, which we have like already discussed. Okay, and finally we are importing this pickle library. So we are going to save our model as diabetes underscore model dot SCAV. So this is the file in which we are saving our trained model, as you can see here. So once we save this, it will, so we can like find this model here. Okay, so let's run all these cells. So this dataset file has been uploaded. I'll also give the link for this dataset file as well. So once you have uploaded this, make sure your system is connected and go to this runtime and click run all. So this will run all the cells. So this won't take like that much time. Okay, so yeah, it has completed running now. So this, until this part, like we are predicting the accuracy score. So this is like the predictive system which we have discussed already. Now this part is for saving our trained model. So we are creating a file name which is diabetes underscore model dot SCAV, and we are creating this file using this write function, and we have like saved it. So once you run this particular cell, you will get this file which is diabetes underscore model dot sav, and we will save this model and we will be using this model file for deploying as an API. So this is the model which we will deploy as API, and these are like the steps. I mean, we don't need this, but what we are actually doing here is we are loading this same saved file here, and we are again doing this predictive system. So this two cells are not like that much necessary. And finally, I'm just printing what are all the columns that are present in this data set. Okay, so we have loaded this diabetes.csv, right? So these are all the columns that are present there. So we have like the number of pregnancies, glucose level, blood pressure value, skin thickness, insulin, BMI, diabetes pedigree function, and age. So these are all the input parameters that we have. And apart from this, there will be this outcome column which we won't need because that's what we are going to predict, right? So you can see this data frame here. So it has like all these values and we have this outcome. So this will be our final thing. So we don't have to include this. Okay, so we need from this pregnancy to this age, which I have like printed in this last step. Now let's see how we can deploy this as an API. Let's download this saved model, go to this files, and I'll go to this option and download this model. So this is what we are going to use now. So this will be in your downloads. So you can see it here. So this is in my downloads folder. Yeah, so you can see this. Now, so I'll open my Anaconda Navigator and I've already opened my Spider. So you have to do this as well. And we need like certain libraries for this. Okay. So the libraries that you need are FastAPI, UVCon, Pydantic, JSON, Pickle, Scikit-learn, and Requests. So these are all the libraries that we need. So if you haven't like installed these libraries on Anaconda, please download these libraries. So these are all the commands for installing these libraries. So pip install FastAPI, and then we have this pip install UVCon, Pickle5, Pydantic, etc. Okay, so how you have to install this is go to your Anaconda Navigator, and this is the environment that I'm running. So in case you have not created a new environment, just choose base root itself. So go to your environments and choose which environment you are using, and in this you will find this play symbol. Click that and open this terminal. Okay, so this is where you have to paste these commands. So if you want to install this fast API, just copy this and paste it in this terminal. Okay, so once you press enter, this library will be installed. So I have already installed this library. So for me, it would say that the requirement already satisfied. Okay, so do this for all the libraries that we have. Okay, so that is like the first thing that you need to do. So like install all these libraries. So just pause this video and install all these libraries before continuing with the other steps. So then only it will work. So I'll close this now. So once you have installed all these libraries, open your Spider. Okay. So now the other thing that you need to do is create a folder. So in my desktop, I have created a folder as ML model as API. So you can create this anywhere. It's not that you have to create only in desktops. I have created this in my desktop, which is named as ML model as API, and I have created another folder as Python code. Again, you can create like give any folder name, and within this I have pasted my diabetes underscore model.sav. So this is the same file that we have downloaded from our collaboratory. Okay, so once you have downloaded that file, copy that file from your downloads and paste it in this particular folder, which you can name as Python code or anything else. So this is where we have to create our Python files in Spider. So I'll go to my Spider. So I'll go to file and give this save, and I'm going to save this in desktop ML model as API Python code. Okay, and I'll name this particular file as ML underscore API, which implies that we are going to deploy this ML model as an API. So make sure like that you use this underscore and not give any space between these words, and press enter. So now we have created this file, and this is where we will be creating this API using fast API library. So the first thing is I'll import from fast API, import fast API. So this F and this API should be in caps. And after that, let's import from Pydantic, import. So yeah, base model is the second thing that we have to install. Okay, so from Pydantic, import base model. Then let's import pickle. So I'll explain you what is the purpose of all these libraries after completing this. So import pickle, and finally let's import JSON library. So import JSON. Okay, so this fast API, as I've told you, it is used for creating these APIs in Python. And from this Pydantic library, we are installing this base model. So the purpose of this base model is we have to mention like what are all the formats of input that our model is going to need. So if you don't understand like what I said now, it's okay. So you will understand once we are like using this base model. And after that, we are importing this pickle library, which is used to load our saved model. So if you remember, we have saved our model using pickle, and we again need this in order to load our model. Finally, we need JSON. I'll also explain why this JSON module is again used. And now I'll create a variable and name this as app. So this app is equal to fast API. Again, this F and API should be in caps, which we have imported here. Okay, so we are loading this instance of fast API to this variable called as app. Now I'm going to create a class as model input. Okay, so model input, and within this we have to mention base model. So this base model is what we have imported from Pydantic library, and this is why we need this Pydantic library as well. Just a second. Yeah. Okay. So I'll give a column here. Now we have to mention what are all the input parameters that our model need. So those are nothing but this pregnancies, glucose, blood pressure, skin thickness, insulin, BMI, diabetes, pedigree function, and age. Okay. So these are all the things that we need. So let's copy all these things and paste it in this spider. Okay. Hmm. Okay. So first is this pregnancies, mention a colon, and we have to mention what is the data type that it takes. So if you just go here, you can see pregnancies, glucose, blood pressure, all the way up to this insulin are integer values. This BMI and diabetes pedigree function, so these two alone are floating point values, that means decimal values. Okay, so we have to mention that. So apart from this BMI and diabetes pedigree function, all are integers. So I'll just scroll here. So we have this pregnancies, and after this pregnancies I'll mention this as int. Okay, so this parenthesis should not be there, so delete it. Okay, so let's delete after like completing this. So second one is glucose, so I'll write glucose here, and this should also be an integer value. Later we have this blood pressure. Okay, so I'll copy this blood pressure here, and this also should be an integer value. And the next one is skin thickness. Again, skin thickness is an integer value. And then we have insulin, BMI, and diabetes pedigree function. Finally, we have this age. So I'll copy this diabetes pedigree function, and finally age. Now we have to mention their data types as well. Okay. So, so I'll give a column here, and let's say this is int. So BMI should be a floating point value. So I'll mention this as float. And diabetes pedigree function is also a float, which we have seen there. So I'll mention this one as float. And age should be an integer. Okay, yeah. So now let's remove all this parenthesis, so it should not be present there. So these are all the parameters or the input features that we will pass to our model, and we have to mention what is its data type. So this one is like necessary. So pregnancies, glucose, blood pressure, skin thickness, and insulin, so these are integers along with this age, whereas this BMI and diabetes pedigree function, so these two things alone are floating point values. Okay, so now I'll just minimize this one. So this is just telling the API that this is the format of data that I'm expecting. So totally, I think there are like 8 values. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there are like 8 values, and out of this 8 values, two are floating points. So this is for the API to know that this is the format of data that I need. Now let's say load the saved model. So loading the saved model, and for this let's call this model as diabetes model, and this diabetes model is equal to pickle.load. And within this we have to say open this diabetes model.sav. So go to the folder in which you are like saving this Python file. So this is the folder where I have created this ml underscore API, and we have this model file saved here, right? So copy the name of this file, paste it within this quotes, and after this we have to say RB. That means we are reading this file in bytes. Okay, so this step is very important. The reason we are putting this model file in the same directory of this Python file is that we don't have to mention any directory. So if this file and this Python file are in the same directory, so that's the reason we need to save this in the same directory. And so this will load this diabetes model.sav to this variable called as diabetes model. Okay, and after this we can create our API. So the first step is importing the required libraries, and loading this instance of FastAPI, then mentioning what is the input format that we need, and after that we are loading the model. Now we can create our API. Okay. So here we have to say at app.post. So there are like two main methods for API. So there are like other methods as well, but the most widely used methods are app.get. So this is what we call as get method, and the other one is app.post. So we use this post method when someone has to give some values to our API. In this case, the values that our API need are these things. So in other words, these values will be posted to our API, and that's why we are using this post method. Okay, so app.post. So if you don't understand much about this API and fast API and all those things, don't worry. I'll create a series of videos on how to create this fast APIs, basics of API, and so on. But for now, let's discuss how this can be implemented in machine learning's perspective. Okay, so at app.post, and within this we have to mention endpoint. So endpoint is like what is the ending of your URL. So here mention forward slash, and let's say this is diabetes prediction. So you can give any name here, but you have to use the same name later what you're giving here. So here I'll use this diabetes underscore prediction. Now we have to create a function. So def, which means define diabetes pred. Again, you can give any name here. So input parameters, give a colon, and here we have to mention what we have mentioned here, the class that we have created. So I'll paste this here, model input. Okay, so this means like this input parameters is the one which the user will be sending to this API. So after this we can say this input data is equal to input parameters dot json. Okay, so I'll explain you what we are doing here, and finally we have this input dictionary. So this input dictionary is equal to json dot loads. So this is not load, this is loads. So we should have that yes there. And here let's say input data. Okay, so let's try to understand what we are doing in this case. Okay, so this should be equal to. Okay, so we have mentioned the format in which our API need the data. So this is the data that will be posted to our API with the endpoint diabetes underscore prediction. Okay, so this is called as the endpoint, and we are creating a function and mentioning the input parameters. The values that the user will give are the format model underscore input, which is this pregnancies glucose all the way up to age. Okay, now this data will be posted to our API in the form of JSON. Okay, and we have to convert this JSON to a dictionary. So that is what we are doing here. So we will finally get a URL while we deploy this API, and to this API they will post these values. The user will post these values, which will be in the form of JSON. So once you receive this JSON, you have to convert this to a dictionary. So that's what we are doing here. So input data is equal to input parameter.json, and when we say this JSON.loads, this will be converted to a dictionary, which will be stored in this input underscore dictionary. Okay, so this is the final dictionary that we are creating, which will contain all these values that we have to predict. Say for example, let's say these are all the values that the person is giving. So 5 represents the pregnancies, and you have the glucose number, and so on. So these are all the 8 input parameters that we need. So this 25.8 is my BMI, and 0.587 is my diabetes pedigree function. So all these values will be posted to our API, and we are converting all these values, which is in the form of JSON, into a dictionary. Okay, now we have to convert this dictionary into a list or tuple like this. So let's see how we can convert this dictionary to a list. So I'll create a variable called as preg, which stands for pregnancies, and I'll mention input dictionary. So input dictionary, and within this we have to say pregnancies. So let me just copy all these things first. So first we have this pregnancy. So the next thing is glucose, as you can see here. So let's do this the 8 times, as we have like 8 input features, 6, 7, and 8. So the second parameter is glucose. So let me name this as GLU, which stands for glucose. And third one is blood pressure. So let me put this as BP. And then we have the skin thickness. Let's call this as skin. And next one is insulin. So I'll name this to insulin itself. And then we have this BMI. So I'll type BMI with lowercase letters. Again, you can use any variable names here. And let's call this diabetes pedigree function as DPF. And finally we have age. So let me call this as age. Now within the quotes we have to mention all these things. First is pregnancy. Later we have this glucose, and the next one is blood pressure, and then skin thickness, the next one is insulin, last before is diabetes pedigree function, and here we have this BMI, and finally we have this age. So what you mention here within this code should be the same thing as what we have mentioned here. Okay, so this is very important. And for this, you can create any variable names in this place. So we have this pregnancies, glucose, BP, all the things here. So what we are trying to do is, so we are like extracting all these values individually. So this is the dictionary that we have created. And when I said input dictionary of pregnancy, so all these things act as my key. And I want to like store all the values for these keys in this variables. So this may sound a bit complicated, but this is the simple concept of dictionary. So we know that dictionary is a key value pair, right? So all these things, pregnancies, glucose, and blood pressure values represents our keys, and these are our values. So we will like pass these values later on, but this is what we call as values. So when we implement this part of the code, this will load all these values. Let's say this 5, 166, all these things to these variables. Now we have to pass these values to our model for prediction. Let's see how we can do that. So this should be inside this diabetes spread function. Okay, so I'll press tab. Now let's create this input list. So this is the final data that we will be passing to our model. So input data is equal to preg. So we just have to mention all these variables. So preg, which stands for pregnancies, and then we have this glucose, BP, skin thickness, insulin, BMI, DPF, which is diabetes pedigree function, and finally age. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so totally there are like 8 input features which we have here. So once we extract all this information from this dictionary, we are storing all these values to individual variables, and later we are combining all these values to a list. Now we can pass this list to our model that we have loaded here, to this diabetes underscore model, and we can make this prediction. Okay, so now let me say prediction is equal to diabetes model dot predict input list. Okay, and later let's say if this prediction, so the final result will be either 1 or 0. So if the value is 1, that means the person is diabetic. If the value is 0, that means the person is not diabetic. So I think, yeah, so here we have mentioned, so 0 means non diabetic, 1 means diabetic. So we have to mention this here. If this final prediction, the final prediction of 0 is equal to 0, in that case we have to say return. So this is a function, so we have to return some values. The person is not diabetic because the value is 0 here. Okay, is not diabetic. Whereas else condition, else means the value will be 1, else we have to return. So here we are returning string values. The person is diabetic. Okay, so this is all. So now once we run this, our API will be ready. So let's try to understand what we are doing here. So this is the same as we done in this like prediction code. So we have built this predictive system, right? So we are like doing the same thing but in a different format. So we are like taking the input data, reshaping this, and finally we are like using this predict function and passing this input data, right? And checking if this value is 0, we say the person is not diabetic. If the value is 1, we have to say diabetic. So this prediction will be a form of list, and in order to capture the first value, we are mentioning this index as 0. So this is not like that much complex. So I hope you understand this part. So if not, please watch that diabetes prediction video where I explain this detailing. So if this final prediction is 0, we have to say person is diabetic. If not, we have to say the person is diabetic. That means in this case, the label is 1. So here the main thing that you have to note here is this is a list, and while predicting we have to enclose this list within a list. So that's why I've used a square bracket here. See, so there is a opening square bracket here and ending square bracket here. Yeah, so this is the one. So this list should be enclosed within a list. So the reason is, if we don't do that, we have to reshape this using this numpy library, using this 1 comma minus 1 and so on. So this is for the model to tell that I'm trying to predict for only one data point. So that's the purpose for this. Okay, so instead of doing this reshape and all those things, we can just put this list within a list. So that is like a shorter way of doing this. So let's try to understand what we have done in this entire part of the code. So first we are like importing these 4 libraries. FastAPI is used for creating these API apps. and pydantic. From this pydantic we are importing base model, and the purpose of this base model is to set up the format in which the data will be posted to our API. And then we have this pickle for we know that to load the saved model. And then we have JSON. So I have explained you why this JSON is used. It is used to convert this JSON object into a dictionary in Python. Okay, so then we are creating a class called as model input, where we are mentioning the format in which the data will be given to our model. And then we are loading the model using this pickle.load. And later we are creating a function called as diabetes spread. And before that we are like creating this post method with the endpoint diabetes underscore prediction. Okay, and we are telling that the input parameters will be in the format of model input, which is given here. Okay, so this is my input values, and now I have to convert this input values, which is in the form of JSON, into a dictionary, which we are doing here. Okay, later we are like extracting all the values from this dictionary and converting it to a list in this step. And later we are using this model.predict function in order to predict whether the label is 0 or 1. So I'll save this file. Now you cannot run it here. So if you run this here, your API won't work. So for this, what we have to do is, so go to your Anaconda navigator and go to your environment. Okay, so machine learning is the environment where I will like opened my spider, and I have installed the library and so on. So I have to go to this play symbol and open my terminal. And here, once this terminal has been opened, so you can see the environment name, which is machine learning. Okay, and we have this the path of my users and my name. Now we have to say cd space double quotes. Okay, so one sec. Now within this double quotes, we have to mention the path of the file in which my Python file is stored. So this is the file, right? This YAML underscore API. So this file is located in this path. So I'll open this folder. If I click here, I will get the path. So I'll copy this path, paste it here. So the command should be cd space double quotes, and within this you can paste the path and again close it with double quotes. Now this will direct you to that particular directory. Okay, so this is now in desktop, and ML model as API in Python code, which is my directory. Now we can deploy our API. So I have to say uvcon, and here we have to mention the name of the Python file that we have created, which is ml underscore API, right? So you can also see this in spider. Okay, so after this uvcon command, I should say ml underscore API. So this this uvcon command won't work if you don't install this uvcon library, and I have showed you you can install this uvcon using pip install uvcon. So make sure that you have installed all this library before running all these steps. So I am in this folder. So I'm mentioning ml underscore API, mention a colon, and mention app. Okay, so it should be uvcon, name of the Python file that you have created, colon, and app. So this app is nothing but what we have created here. So we have loaded our FastAPI instance to this variable called as app, right? So that is what I am mentioning here. Okay, so uvcon, name of the Python file, which is ml underscore app, sorry, ml underscore API colon app. So after this, press enter. So now this will give you your localhost URL in which your FastAPI is being deployed. Okay, so I'll press enter. So it might take like 3 or 4 seconds in order to give us the details. Just wait for a few seconds. Yeah, so this is the port or the localhost URL in which my API is running. Okay, now we can test our API. So like you can give this localhost URL to this a UI that you are building in, let's say, in React.js. So once you give this to this localhost URL and post the values, you will get the prediction of whether the person is diabetic or not. So for now, let's not go to that UI part. Let's test whether this API is working or not. So for this, we can also check this API. So we can also test this API in Python itself. So I'll come to my spider, and I'll create a new file. And now in this new file, let's see whether this API is working well or not. So here I'll import the library JSON, and I'll also import a library called as requests. So this request is used to get or post values to our API. And now I'll say URL. So URL is equal to, so within this we have to paste this localhost URL which we have got here, which is HTTP 127 in the port 8000. So I'll copy this paste it here, and we should also mention the endpoint. So put a forward slash here and copy the endpoint that we have created, which is diabetes underscore prediction. Okay, so diabetes underscore prediction. Now, so let's pass the input values. So I'll create a dictionary as input data for model. Okay, so this is a dictionary which we can create using curly brackets. So let's give the values. So the values should be, so these should be the same names as we have here: pregnancies, glucose, blood pressure, all these values. So I'll copy all these things, paste it here, and now we can remove all this int and all those things. So this is where we have to give the real values. So I'll remove all this int. So this is basically a dictionary that we are creating. Float diabetes pedigree function, finally age. Now all these values should be enclosed in quotes, either single quotes or double quotes. So I'll enclose this within single quotes. So this will be the key for my dictionary. So blood pressure, skin thickness, insulin, BMI, diabetes pedigree function, age. Okay, so now we can pass the values. So I'll save this file as API implementation. So API underscore implementation. Okay, so the idea is I have to post all these values. So I have to post all these values to this URL, and it will tell me whether the person is diabetic or not. Okay, so this is the final result that we are interested in. Okay, so now let's give some values to this. So I'll open my diabetes.csv file. So let's test for a person with diabetes and person without diabetes. Okay, so let's check this first data point, which is 6148 and so on, and the second data point. Once we give all these values, the outcome should be 1. That means it should say the person is diabetic, right? So let's paste all these values. So for pregnancies, so pregnancies, the value is 6, and for glucose, we can see the value is 148. So just see this first line, and we can like put all the values here. So glucose is 148, and blood pressure is 72, skin thickness is 35, insulin the value is given as 0, and BMI is given as 33.6, and pedigree function. So diabetes pedigree function is given as 0.627, and finally we have this age. So age value should be 50 as given here. Okay, so this is the data that I'm passing, and it's showing a error here because all these should be separated by comma. Okay, 72 comma 35 0 33.6 and finally 0.627. So this is the dictionary that we have created. Now we have to post this dictionary to this URL. Okay, so these are my keys which are enclosed here, and the values for this key is this the value for this key pregnancies is 6, and the value for the key glucose is 148 and so on. So this is what we are extracting in this particular step. Okay, so I'm mentioning this input dictionary, which is nothing but this input data from for model. So I'll change this p to model. Okay, so we are like extracting all these values individually in this particular step, and then we are like using it to predict it. Okay, so let me go here. Right now, as I've told you earlier, this is in the form of a dictionary. Now the next step that we have to do is convert this dictionary in the form of JSON. So that's why we have imported this JSON library here, and for this I can say input JSON. So this is the JSON object that we will passing or posting to our API. So input JSON is equal to JSON.dumps. Again, this is not dump, this is dumps. So here we have to mention input data for model. Okay, and finally we can say this the response is equal to request dot post, and within this we have to mention this URL comma data is equal to input JSON. So this final response will be stored in this variable called as response, and we can print this response dot text. So it will only print the value if you give this as text, because finally we are giving or we are returning the values in the form of a string, which is text. Okay, so I'll save this one. Now we know that this data point refers to a person who has diabetes. The outcome is 1. So the final result we should get once we run this cell is the person is diabetic, right? So we have to get this particular string. So let's see whether this API is working. So this is the API that we have created, and this is the endpoint for the API that we have created in this particular file. Okay, so here what we are doing is first importing JSON and request. So JSON is used to convert this dictionary into a JSON object, which we are doing here, and later we are using this request in order to mention this URL and post this data to our URL. Okay, so this should be the same as we have mentioned here, because this is the format, right? So we have to pass the values in the same format. So I'll save this and let's run this one. Okay, now it says the person is diabetic because it is the outcome is 1. Now what we are doing is this API is running, so it is running in this particular port. So you can say, so 200, okay, so 200 means in HTTP request 200 means the input value is working, and everything is working properly. So you may also get like internal server error and other things. So if there are some errors in your code, let's say that there is some error that you have made in this particular API file, so those errors will be mentioned in this terminal. Okay, so you won't see it here, but it will be mentioned here. So that is other thing that you can remember. And now we have created this and deployed this API in localhost, and we have mentioned this endpoint. Now it can predict whether a person is diabetic or not. So you don't have to train your model each time, and like once you can save your model and you can deploy this in the form of API. Now let's check for a person without diabetes as well. Here let's check the second values. So here I'll change this to 1, and now let's change this to 85, which is given here. So the glucose value should be 85, and then we have the blood pressure value as 66. Skin thickness value should be 29. Insulin values again 0. BMI is 26.6. Yeah, 26.6. And diabetes pedigree function is 0.351. 351. And finally the age is 31. Okay, so here the outcome is 0 as it's mentioned here. Now the model should say that the person is not diabetic. Okay, so I'll save this and run this one. Okay, so it says the person is not diabetic. So instead of telling this in string, you can also like return this 0 or 1 in this case. So in this case, you can return 0, or in this case, you can return 1. So how all these things comes together is, so once we deploy this in a URL, so we will paste this URL in our UI, and from there the UI person will post this data. Which is probably entered by the user, and this data will be posted back to our UI, where in the back end we can like post this to our API and tell whether the person is diabetic or not. So this is how all these things comes into play. So this is just for testing purpose, but this is what we are interested in. So this is the file that we are interested in. So instead of checking this in this Python file itself, so this will be integrated in a UI. So in this case, this is a localhost URL, and this will run only in your system. Okay, so this is not a public URL yet. And in the next video, I'll show you how you can deploy this API as a public URL. Public URL or public API is the one where if you like deploy this API, anyone can access it, anyone can check its result. So that is what I mean when I say public. I'll show you how we can do that on Collaboratory, Google Collaboratory, and in the upcoming video, I'll also show you how we can deploy this API on Heroku, where it will be a permanent link. Okay, so those will be the topics that we'll be covering in the upcoming videos. And before like ending this, I'll just give you a quick recap of what are the things that we have done here. So this may seem a bit confusing to you, as you might not have experienced working with this API and FastAPI and things like that. But like once you start practicing it, it is like much easier. Okay, and APIs are not only used for deploying this machine learning model. So there are like a lot of other applications for this API as well, and it is like a great skill to have to build APIs. Okay, so I'll just give you a quick recap as told. So first we are like saving this diabetes model, which we have trained using this diabetes.csv, and we have saved this using this pickle library. So we have like dumped all the parameters to this diabetes underscore model.sav, which we have downloaded from here, right? And later I have created a folder called as the ML model as API in my desktop, and there I've created a folder called as Python code, and this is where I'm like saving my Python file and my model. So this should be in the same directory, this diabetes model.sav, and MLAP, my Python file should be in the same directory. And before writing all those codes, you have to mention, like, you have to install all these libraries, and this is the command for it. Okay, so pip install FastAPI, ubcon, pickle5, pydantic, scikit-learn, request, and pypa JSON. So this is for installing the JSON library. So make sure you run or you install all these libraries from the command prompt or terminal, which I have shown you. So after that, we can come to our spider, where we are importing all the required libraries, loading the fast API instance to this variable called as app. Later we are mentioning what is the input parameter. So we have this pregnancy, glucose, all the 8 parameters, as we have seen in this collaboratory file itself. Okay, so to save this file, just I'll give you the link. Go to this runtime. So go to this runtime, and we have to click run all, and before that you have to upload this dataset file. So after uploading this dataset file only, you have to run all these cells. Okay, so then we are like loading the saved model, which should be in the same directory as this ml underscore API file, and then we are creating this post method for our API with this endpoint. Okay, and then we are like extracting all this data. So first we are converting this JSON file in or JSON object into a dictionary, and later we are like passing all these values to our model for prediction. And when the label is 0, it should say the person is not diabetic. When the label is 1, it should say the person is diabetic. So that's what we have done in this if condition. And we have tested this API in Python itself by mentioning this URL, which is my localhost port that we are getting from this terminal. Okay, and later like we are converting this dictionary into a JSON object, which we are posting here, and we can like print this response.text, which will give you the final result as whether the person is diabetic or not. As I've told you in the next video, let's try to understand how we can create this public API, and in the video after that, we will also be understanding the deployment in Heroku or other platforms. Okay, so I hope you have understood all the things covered in this video. And if you wanted to stop this deployment in this localhost, come to this terminal, press Ctrl C. So if it's not working the first time, just press Ctrl C again, and it will shut down your system. Now your API won't be working. Now if I run the cell, it won't be giving. It probably will give me an error because this API is not running, as you can see. So the connection error is there. Now if I go here, open this terminal again, I can say this. If you remember, we have to mention the directory of this Python file, and later we have to say ubcon and ml underscore API and colon app. Now press enter. Again, this will run, and now you can run this file to check its implementation. So this port won't change when you run in localhost. So you will get the value for this, the label for this particular values, which is the person is not diabetic. Okay, so I'll close this deployment now by pressing Ctrl plus C. So it will shut down the system. Okay, so this is how all these things work. I hope you have understood all the things covered. So like if you skipped a few parts of the video, you might miss few things and you might get an error. So please watch the video completely, practice this by yourself, and see how all these things comes together. Okay, and I promise you this will be very helpful for you in several cases. Okay, so that's it from my side, and I'll give the link for all these Python files and the collaboratory file as well. So yeah, I'll see you in the next upload. Thanks for watching.